Welcome to the WatchOut channel. I'm the Haunting Hour 17, passionate about a classic, hinting at a specific time for paranormal activity and content. The video I will share today is from Midnight Tales. This video may be true or just fiction, so you are the judge of whether it is true or not. You decide what you watch. There are many more scary and horrifying incidents shared by the people involved, so be sure to watch until the end of this videos. Maraming salamat po, and enjoy scary watching.
When I think back on being a kid, the summers always felt endless. My best friend and I grew up in a quiet New England town where nothing much ever happened, so the woods were our playground. We'd ride our bikes out past the edge of town, drop them near some trailhead, and just wander until the sun started setting. There was this constant thrill that we might stumble across something hidden, an old cabin, a forgotten graveyard, anything to give us a story to tell. One afternoon, my dad gave us the kind of story that stuck in your head. He told us about a restaurant that used to sit deep in the woods, a place people stopped going to in the 70s. According to him, the local mafia had ties to it. There were rumors about people disappearing around that time, whispers that the bodies ended up dumped in the quarry out back. He swore it was just town gossip, but even he admitted nobody ever proved otherwise. My friend and I didn't need convincing. We knew right away we had to find it. For weeks, we turned it into a kind of obsession. We'd ask around, dig through old maps, even try to match up the overgrown trails with what we thought might have been old roads. The whole thing had this treasure hunt feeling, only instead of gold or pirate ships, we were chasing a place tied to crime stories and ghostly rumors. By early September, we finally stumbled across it. The sight of the restaurant made us stop in our tracks. The building was sagging under the weight of 2 decades without care, with vines creeping up its walls and trees practically hugging the structure. The parking lot was more weeds than asphalt, and the roof had partially caved in on one side, but it still carried this strange kind of presence. We circled the property, half excited and half nervous. To us, it was like finding a relic. After pacing around for a while, we pushed through a broken side door. The air inside hit us first. It smelled of damp wood, dust, and something sour that had probably been there for years. We lit our flip phones, and their tiny bluish glow barely cut through the gloom. The main dining area had rows of broken booths, tables flipped over, shards of glass on the floor. For a while, it was quiet enough that we started to relax, picking through the mess and laughing when we found things like old menus or a collapsed chair. Then a sound broke the silence. A shuffle. Not loud, but enough to freeze us both in place. We looked at each other, our eyes wide. My friend whispered, "Did you hear that?" I just nodded, because it had come from below, somewhere in the lower level. We told ourselves it had to be an animal, maybe raccoons or something, but neither of us felt easy about it. We made our way downstairs anyway. The lower floor was darker, colder, and carried this heaviness, like the air hadn't been stirred in years. Just a few minutes in, the sound came again, clearer this time, like something moving across the hallway ahead of us. My friend grabbed my arm and whispered that we should go. I turned toward him to say maybe we were overreacting, and that's when I caught it. A figure. Just a dark shape sliding from one side of the hall to the other. It was fast, but it was enough. My stomach dropped. We didn't need to speak. We just ran. Our sneakers pounded up the stairs, over the broken tile, out through the side door, and into the woods. By then the sun had set behind the trees, and the woods had gone from welcoming to suffocating. We didn't stop running until the building was long out of sight. The next morning, though, our curiosity dragged us back. This time, we moved slower and quieter, as if whoever or whatever was inside might still be around. We retraced our steps into the lower floor, straight to the hall where I'd seen that shadow. The room itself told us everything. Piled in the corner was bedding, dirty blankets, worn clothes, shirts that looked like they'd been there for weeks, if not months. The sight of it made my skin crawl. It hadn't been a ghost or some trick of the light. Someone had been living in that building. We decided to get out and find the quarry instead. It didn't take long before the trees opened up to this massive rock face, the kind that looked endless from where we stood. We started walking around the edge, pointing out graffiti and broken beer bottles scattered around from other visitors. That's when the sound came. Heavy footsteps behind us, close enough that they couldn't be mistaken for an animal. Before we could react, a man jumped out from behind the brush. He was older, maybe late 40s, with dirty blonde hair hanging in his face. His clothes were ragged, his skin sunburned, and his eyes wild. He tackled my friend hard to the ground, and instinct just took over. I kicked and shoved at him until he staggered back. Then he reached into his pants and pulled out a hunting knife. The sight of the blade in the fading daylight was enough to send us both tearing through the woods. We didn't look back. We didn't slow down. We just ran until the side of my house came into view. We locked the doors and sat on the floor shaking, trying to process what had just happened. We told my parents when they came home, but the disbelief was all over their faces. They thought we'd exaggerated or made the story up to spook them. That night, while my friend and I were trying to distract ourselves with video games, the floodlight in the backyard snapped on. I crept to the back door, my heart hammering, and saw the shed door hanging wide open. We always kept it shut. I ran upstairs, shaking my dad awake, and begged him to check. Annoyed, he finally came down with me and stepped outside. He got within a few feet of the shed before someone, an older man, burst out and sprinted into the woods. My dad ran back to the house, yelling for me to call the police. The cops came quickly, and after hearing the story, they searched the shed. Inside, they found the same kind of knife the man had pulled on us earlier. They promised to keep patrols in the area, but weeks passed with no news. Eventually, life moved on, though the fear stuck with us for a long time. Years later, when I was in college, my mom sent me an article. A local man had been found dead in that same abandoned building. The story hit me hard, not just because of the memories, but because the police never found who did it. I'll never know for sure, but I can't shake the thought that it was the same man who chased us all those years ago. Back in February of 2022, a buddy of mine and I decided to head out for a weekend camping trip. We'd gotten into the habit of doing it a couple of times a month since my car could finally handle the back roads, and this time, we went back to a remote spot we'd discovered a week earlier. It was the...
Please subscribe, like, and press the notification bell. Maraming salamat po, and enjoy scary watching.
Kind of place where you might not see another person for miles, which was exactly what we liked about it. We got there Friday night, set up camp, and spent the evening by the fire. Nothing unusual. Saturday night is when things went sideways. It was around 9 o'clock, pitch black. The fire was the only light we had, and we were halfway through a couple beers when it started. Out of nowhere, this screaming cut through the woods. Not a startled shout or someone messing around. This was raw, guttural screaming, the kind of sound that instantly made the hair on your arms stand up. My friend and I just sat there, frozen, trying to make sense of it. At first, we hoped it was some drunk hiker blowing off steam, but the longer it went on, the clearer it became that this wasn't someone having fun. It had this edge of rage and misery, like whoever it was had lost their mind. It went on for 5 minutes straight before it finally tapered off, and by that point we were both paranoid as hell. We scrambled to gather anything we could use as a weapon: hatchets, knives, even big branches from the firewood pile. Every crackle in the trees had us on edge. 15 minutes later, just when we were starting to think maybe the night would quiet down again, a glow appeared down the trail. A lantern and a flashlight, moving closer. Then this guy stepped into our camp. He was breathing heavy, eyes wide, and before we could even get a word out, he asked if he could sit by the fire for a bit. My buddy and I gave each other a quick look, both of us holding tight to the makeshift weapons we'd grabbed, and finally agreed since it was 2 against 1. The silence got unbearable, so I asked him flat out what was going on. That's when he told us his name was Gary, and that the screaming we'd heard had been his friend, who he said had snapped and tried to kill him. He explained how they'd come out together, just hanging out, when out of nowhere his buddy lost it, started screaming, then lunged at him. Gary said he barely got away, grabbed his keys and light and ran. Then he added the part that made my stomach twist. His friend had chased him through the woods. Right as those words left his mouth, the screaming started again. This time it was close. So close we could make out the words. "Gary, I just want your balance. Give me your balance, Gary." It didn't even sound human anymore. It was this bizarre mix of guttural growls and sing-song tones, like his buddy was stuck between a laugh and a howl. My friend and I killed our lanterns instantly, crouched low, and prayed the maniac wouldn't notice our camp. By some miracle, he kept moving down the trail, his voice echoing further into the woods until it was gone. Over the next couple hours, Gary explained more. They had each taken a hefty dose of mushrooms earlier that day, and things were fine until his friend, let's call him Ty, suddenly went off the rails. Gary was still a little high himself, shaky but coherent, and kept repeating that he thought Ty had really wanted to hurt him. We sat there with him until close to midnight, the screaming still carrying faintly in the distance every now and then. Then it stopped. For about an hour there was nothing but the crackle of the fire and the occasional pop of ice shifting in the trees. We thought maybe Ty had wandered off and collapsed somewhere. That hope disappeared when a new voice came from the edge of the trees. "Help! I'm lost! Please!" Gary tensed immediately and tried to hide. My buddy and I stood up, armed and ready. Into the firelight stepped this huge guy, easily over 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered, with this dazed expression, like he didn't fully know where he was. He kept saying he was sorry, that he blacked out and didn't remember what had happened. We didn't drop our guard, but after some tense talking, we decided to walk him back to his own campsite. He seemed calmer, and eventually just slumped by his tent, like he had nothing left in him. The night ended without any more screaming, and by morning Gary was ready to leave. He thanked us over and over, gave me his number, and promised to let me know when he got home safe. We still keep in touch, and we're even planning another camping trip. Though after that night, I'm not sure anything out in the woods will ever feel the same. When I was a kid growing up in East Texas, most of my days were spent trailing behind my older brother. He was 7 years ahead of me, already in high school when I was barely 10, and since I was homeschooled, I had the time to follow him anywhere. He always had some excuse to sneak off into the woods, usually to hide his cigarettes or chewing tobacco from our parents, and I was the tag-along. Those woods became our playground, a place where hours passed without us realizing. The land to the south of our place was owned by a mining company, so we weren't supposed to be wandering there, but to the north was endless forest and pasture. Technically, it was private property too, but in the country you assume you'll see a farmhouse long before you stumble into somebody's yard. Most days we didn't go far, maybe an hour's walk out before circling back. But one afternoon my brother got it in his head that we should just keep walking until we couldn't anymore. So we did. We passed pastures, crossed barbed wire fences, and moved through stretches of thick trees. My brother carried a Dr. Pepper bottle he was spitting tobacco into, and I kept asking how much farther, but he was determined. At some point, we came across a strange little pond, almost perfectly round, with one bank higher than the others. He told me it had been dug out with a tractor, which explained the odd shape. We kept going, and before long the woods opened up in a way I hadn't seen before. The clearing curved sharply, and as we followed it, something massive came into view. A large white building behind a tall fence. There was a wide gate and a dirt road stretching away from it, like it had been built to bring vehicles in and out. The strangest part was that it wasn't abandoned. We could actually hear voices and movement coming from inside the fence, and I remember clearly seeing people near the gate. That's when both of us froze. It wasn't just that we were trespassing. It was the sudden realization that whatever this place was, we weren't supposed to know it existed. My brother didn't waste time debating it. He told me firmly we had to go, and the tone of his voice made my stomach drop. We bolted. We ran so hard that we nearly stumbled back into the pond, and we didn't stop until we'd cut through every patch of woods and crossed every fence we could remember. When we finally caught our breath, my brother made me promise I wouldn't say a word about what we saw to our parents. He knew he'd get in trouble for dragging me out that far, but I think he was just as shaken as I was. After that, we still explored the woods, but never that deep again. Years later, when we were older and my brother had long since been busted by our dad for dipping, we started telling the story to family members, like it was one of our great adventures. Our mom was shocked, but we mostly laughed about it. Over time, it turned into this running joke about the time we nearly stumbled onto some secret government research site. But the memory...
Wait a minute. I noticed that 98% of our viewers have not yet subscribed to our channel. So subscribe now for our new videos that are coming soon, and I will upload them for you every day. Be sure to watch till the end of the video, because there are many more paranormal clips waiting for you at the end. Maraming salamat po, and enjoy scary watching.
He never fully left me. Recently, I pulled up the area on Google Maps, half expecting to finally put the mystery to rest. I found the pond, the curving tree line, even the clearings. But the building? Nothing. No road, no fence, no trace of a facility. It didn't make sense. I called my brother to ask if he still remembered it, and he immediately said he did. He even admitted it scared him worse than he let on back then. Both of us still can't explain it. To this day, I remember the dread of standing in that clearing and realizing we'd stumbled onto something we had no business finding. My mom has a story from her teenage years that stuck with me ever since she told it. She grew up in Alabama in the early 70s, and back then her family didn't have much. She was the oldest of 5 kids, with 3 younger sisters and a little brother, who was still small enough to be called the baby. My grandfather was strict, but he tried to prepare his kids for the world. He didn't always trust the neighborhoods they lived in, so one weekend he decided to take everyone into the woods and teach them how to handle a rifle. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than a family lesson in self-defense. It was late fall, so the air had that sharp chill to it, and the trees were stripped bare, leaving the ground covered in crunchy leaves. They picked a clearing just off an old dirt road near Montevallo, not too far from Birmingham, but far enough to feel completely secluded. The kids were excited. This was a break from chores and school, and it felt like an adventure. My grandmother came along too, probably more to keep an eye on everyone than to enjoy it. They hadn't been out there long when something felt off. At first, it was just the sound of an engine echoing faintly through the woods. That alone was strange. Cars didn't usually show up that deep in. My grandfather stiffened up immediately. Even with the rifle, he didn't like surprises, and he motioned for everyone to stay low. Before long, a big blue Ford Galaxy rolled into view, the engine louder than it should have been in the silence of the woods. What happened next is the part my mom says she'll never forget. The man behind the wheel stopped, stepped out, and without hesitation pulled a woman from the car. She didn't resist. She didn't even make a sound. He dragged her like dead weight and dropped her on the ground as if she was nothing to him. Then he got back in the car and drove off like it was the most normal thing in the world. The family stayed hidden under leaves like my grandfather told them, barely breathing, hearts pounding. Then, unbelievably, the woman sat up. She turned her head and looked directly at them. My mom swears it wasn't just a glance. It was like she knew they were there all along. My grandfather asked her if she needed help. She simply shook her head and said she'd be fine. That was it. No explanations, no request for help, no attempt to follow them. It was almost like she wanted them to leave. My grandfather didn't argue. He quickly decided the lesson was over, and they started making their way back to the dirt road where their car was parked. But things weren't finished. As they walked out, the blue Ford Galaxy appeared again, heading toward them on the same road. My mom glanced inside and noticed a machete laid across the front seat beside the driver. It was huge, and it wasn't hidden. It was placed where they'd be sure to see it. The man slowed down and stopped, smiling like he was just being friendly. He asked my grandfather what they were doing out there. My grandfather held his rifle where the man could clearly see it and replied casually, telling him they were just out shooting for practice. The man nodded, told him to have a nice day, and kept driving. My mom remembers how calm the whole exchange seemed, but underneath it all, the sight of that machete made her stomach twist. The next day, my grandfather couldn't shake the whole thing and went back out to the woods alone. The woman wasn't there anymore. Instead, he found a wig, a purse, some tissues, and a pair of eyeglasses lying in the leaves. He picked them up and brought them home, which sent my mom into hysterics. She screamed over and over that the woman had been killed, convinced that they had watched the beginning of something awful. My grandfather eventually took the items to the police, but nothing ever came of it. No follow-up, no news stories, nothing. Just when they thought it might fade into memory, something else happened that put everyone back on edge. Early the very next morning, my grandmother called the house from work. She told the kids not to take the bus to school that day. When my mom asked why, my grandmother's answer made her blood run cold. She said the blue Ford Galaxy was sitting at the bus stop, waiting. When I was 14, my family was living in a small town because of one of my dad's work assignments. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. We were already getting ready to move back to the city at the end of the summer. During that time, I'd made a friend at school named Lawrence. He liked to act like he was tougher than he actually was, but he was fun to be around. And since I was moving soon, his parents let me stay over at his place one weekend. The next morning, Lawrence told me he had found something out in the woods a couple miles from his house. "It's a cave," he said, grinning. "We should go check it out." To my 14-year-old brain, that sounded like an adventure. I didn't think twice about it. The only thing he admitted later was that he'd never actually been inside. It was just something he stumbled on while wandering around. It took us a while to find it, but eventually we came across this opening, tucked away behind trees and brush. From the outside, it didn't look like much. But once we stepped inside, it was obvious other people had been there before. Old beer bottles, crumpled chip bags, broken glass, all the signs that kids or maybe adults had used it as a hangout spot. At first, I thought that was all it was going to be. The deeper we went, though, the worse it got. A heavy, sour smell hung in the air, and the ground started to look less like a party spot and more like someone's home. There was trash piled against the rock walls, a dirty blanket laid out like a bed, and an old grocery bag that looked like it had been used as a bathroom. I even noticed a few syringes lying around. At the time, I didn't recognize them, but looking back now, I know exactly what they were. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just a random hangout. Someone was living there. That was enough to make me uneasy, but what I found next made my skin crawl. On top of a pile of junk, there was an old photo album. I picked it up and flipped it open while holding my flashlight with the other hand. The first images I saw were black and white, grainy photographs.
Please subscribe, like, and press the notification bell. Maraming salamat po, and enjoy scary watching.
At first, they looked like pictures of prison yards, fences, guard towers. Then I turned to a page that made my blood run cold. It was a pile of bodies, people in uniforms with stars on them. I realized I was staring at photos from the Holocaust. As I started to turn the page, I noticed two of them were stuck together. There was some kind of substance smeared across the paper. It only took me a second to put it together, and when I did, my whole body went rigid. Whoever had been living in that cave had been using these photographs for that. I remember just standing there, flashlight shaking in my hand, feeling this horrible sense that I was looking straight into someone's twisted mind. I spun around to Lawrence, and for once I didn't care if he thought I was being scared or weak. "We need to leave, now." He didn't argue, which told me he was just as shaken. In fact, he'd seen something worse. He told me that in another album he found, there were photos of women tied up and gagged, and tucked between those pictures was one of a child with a badly burned face. As if that wasn't enough, he swore he'd heard coughing coming from further inside the cave, like someone was actually there. We didn't wait around to confirm it. We bolted out of that cave and didn't stop running until we were back at his house. Both of us were pale and shaken, barely able to talk about it. Later that day, we finally told his parents everything. They called the police, and officers did go out there. But when they searched, all they found was trash. No albums, no blankets, no syringes, nothing. To this day, I don't know what we walked into, but I've never forgotten the smell, those photographs, and the sick feeling that someone had been just a few feet deeper in that cave while we were standing there. That night started off like any other small-town birthday gathering, just a handful of friends hanging out and messing around in Nick's backyard. His house was at the edge of the woods, far enough from neighbors that we felt like we had the world to ourselves. Nick had a hot tub tucked against the tree line, and after a few hours of beers, silly stories, and terrible jokes, someone, probably Sarah, suggested we go skinny dipping in it as a birthday present for him. We all laughed nervously, pretending we were too responsible for something so dumb, but the combination of alcohol and bravado eventually won out. Soon enough, we were peeling off our clothes, trying to ignore the deep shadows of the forest behind the yard, and stepping into the warm water, feeling like kings of the world in our little private space. At first, it was perfect. The night air smelled faintly of pine and cold dew. The water was warm against our chilled skin, and the forest behind us felt distant, like some other world we weren't allowed to see. We were joking, telling stories and splashing each other. Every little sound from the trees just part of the night's atmosphere. Branches cracking underfoot made us glance toward the shadows now and then, but nothing seemed threatening, until the scream hit. It came out of nowhere, sharp and high-pitched, carrying a raw intensity that made the hair on my arms stand straight up. It wasn't drunk yelling. It wasn't a wild animal. It was human, but it wasn't human. The sound reverberated through the trees and the hot tub water, and for a second, it was like the entire backyard was holding its breath. Every one of us went rigid, and Nick, who usually played the tough guy, froze in place. For a long moment, we just stared at the forest, too scared to breathe, while Mary fumbled for her phone. She turned on the flashlight and cautiously aimed it into the dark, and for a moment, nothing moved. Then we noticed it, eyes reflecting far behind Sarah, a white form shifting just enough that it was unmistakable. That was all it took. We scrambled out of the hot tub, dripping water, barely thinking about towels or our clothes. Screaming and tripping over roots, we ran toward the back door. Nick snatched a kitchen knife, and we slammed and locked every door and window in a frantic panic. The forest stayed alive with sounds, the rasping of breaths, the rustle of underbrush, the occasional sharp snap of a branch, like it was actively watching and following our movements. We huddled together, trembling, trying to make sense of what had just happened, realizing how close we had been to whatever had been out there. Phones, wallets, keys, all left near the edge of the forest, were now useless. We tried not to think about them, but every tiny noise made us jump. Half an hour in, we heard another scream, this time from even closer, followed almost immediately by soft, deliberate knocks on the doors. Sarah started crying, and I could see the panic on everyone else's faces. The darkness outside seemed alive, pressing against the windows, feeding off our fear. Nick finally ran to meet his parents on the way home, and when they arrived, we explained what happened as best we could, but they couldn't see or hear anything unusual. We stayed in the basement, wrapped in blankets and silence, listening to the occasional crack of a branch or distant rustle in the yard. Every minute felt like an hour, every shadow on the wall a potential intruder. Eventually, the night quieted down, and we slept fitfully, waking with the first light of morning. Once the sun was up, we went back to gather our things from the yard. Everything was there, except for Nick's shirt and the underwear of Sarah and Mary, which were gone without a trace. Nothing else seemed disturbed. We never found any footprints, no sign of anyone else in the yard, and no explanation for the screaming. Even now, years later, thinking back to that night sends a chill down my spine. It was a perfect mix of teenage recklessness and sheer terror, a night where the woods themselves seemed alive and watching. No one has ever been able to explain what we saw, heard, or felt, and for the rest of our lives, whenever we passed those woods or saw the edge of a forest at night, the memory of those screaming eyes lurking in the darkness stayed with us.
Please like and subscribe to my channel. This is a big help to me as a content creator, to provide you with many scary, creepy, and terrifying videos. Maraming salamat po, and see you again in my next videos. I'm the Haunting Hour 17.